At its peak in the late 1800s, there were 28 whiskey distilleries in Ireland. 11,000 men worked as coopers, building and repairing barrels by hand. Today there are 3 distillers and just 4 coopers. Ger Buckley is a 5th-generation cooper and one of 2 at Midleton Distillery in County Cork. He doesn't have to build barrels from scratch anymore, but he can, using tools and techniques handed down over the years.
What I'm going to do today is just talk about some of the tools that have been handed down through generations to me that I still use today. On my right here I have a traditional compass that we would make ourselves, that my ancestors made. This particular one here was made by my great uncle. He used it in the British Navy when he was a cooper on board ship, back when tall ships were there. He would have used it to make small casks for water containers, gunpowder barrels and so on. This size compass would have been used to make what we call here in Cork a firkin. It was traditionally used to make butter firkins to travel throughout the world in the British Empire. And the idea with a compass is that when you compass the top of your cask, with your head, you go around it 6 times, that gives you your circumference. So a compass is very important to a cooper, and it's fairly unique to have a timber compass. So that's a unique tribute to my ancestors, that we had timber compasses. In regards to some of the other tools that I have, a lot of them would be named after animals, and you know that can happen throughout the world as well, where different locations had different names on tools, even though they were the same. Like for us here, this particular tool is a holding tool, and it's to pull back the stave at the top of the cask. And if you look at it, it kind of would remind you of a dog, as you can see the ears, and that's what it's called, a dog. So still today in cabinet making and carpentry, any tool that's used to hold something to a bench would be called a dog. I like to think that maybe it started with this tool. So again, with the animal team, I have a tool here called a spoke shave, called a swift. It's a type of spoke shave. You kind of see the wings of a bird on it. So a swift is a local bird here in Ireland, kind of like a swallow. So you can see where it gets its name. Other specialised tools that we would have would be some of the knives that we would use. Traditional backing knife. Still very common in chair making, spindle making, stick making, walking sticks and stuff like that. People who like to work in traditional crafts and methods. So it would be a common enough tool even still to buy today. The other corresponding tool for hollowing the inside of a stave would be what we call a hollowing knife. It's unique to coopering in that it's the only shape that's used. It's not really used in any other aspect in different trades. So you have your stave rounded and hollowed on the inside, rounded on the back, hollow on the inside. It's the basic traditional method of making a stave. Again, a similar tool is what we call a round shave. Here we call it in Cork. Some people call it an in shave. Again, widely available to buy. Still used in traditional chair making for maybe hollowing out the seats of chairs, and maybe boat building for scraping down. So it can still be purchased widely. Again, specialist tools, a typical saw, but rounded rather than flat. And the reason for that is that if you take your stave and the groove on the top of the cask isn't straight, it's actually rounded into the cask. So you've got to have your saw the same shape, so that when your head goes into it, which will be round, it'll correspond with the groove. So you can almost see that the saw and the head are similar shape. Another very ancient tool that we would use in coopering, that it's a common enough tool, is an adze. You still come across it in traditional boat building, maybe with a longer handle. I know some chair makers have it, but they have the adze cupped so that it can chip out on the chair. I like to think of it, it's a very ancient tool in its design. I mean, if you can imagine that it would have been made from flint originally, and then gone on to bronze and so on. It's one of 3 tools that developed independently in man's development. There's been remnants of adze, stone adze found in North American Indians. Polynesian people would have had inads made from giant clams for digging out hollow canoes. The Far East, the Middle East developed it. So it's a very common tool up to 100 years ago. Carpenters would have had it. The other tool that would be common to coopering would be a cooper's axe. And it looks a beast of a thing, kind of clumsy, but it's actually quite clever in that the handle is splayed away from the blade, so that when I go to carve, I don't clip my fingers. And the bevel is only on one side. So I'll show you that in a minute how it works, but it's quite clever in its use. Not common anymore, still used maybe in traditional barrel making, which I'll demonstrate in a minute. Last but not least would be a cooper's hammer and a cooper's driver. These were used to push down the hoops on the cask. A driver must be caught in a specific way, so when you driving out the hoops, you don't damage your fingers, so you can't catch it like that. You've got to really hold it like that. This particular hammer was given to me by a very old work colleague. He had it his entire working life. His father had it his entire working life, and out of 2 generations, maybe 80 to 90 years of use, the handle was worn thin from their grip. So the imprint of their lifetime grip is embossed on the handle, you could say. It's quite unique. The other thing that is unique with the hammer is there's no wear, because when they made contact with whatever they were doing, either working on the anvil, working on a cask, everything was hit on the ball of the hammer. Consequently, because they had perfect technique, they never snapped the handle. If they had poor technique, they would warn the handle, warn the hammer. And that meant they never developed an injury, never developed elbow injury, shoulder injury. So, you know, tools can last a couple of lifetimes if they're used properly. Whereas in consequence, our colleague who used this tool had a technique of hitting everything sideways. So you can see the wear after 25 years. So more than likely he would have developed an injury somewhere down the line. And one of the other rare tools I have here would be a crow's. It's to cut the groove on the top of the stave for your head to sit into. And you can see this has got a lot of wear. And I still use it all the time because it's one of the more comfortable crow's to use when I'm using it to cut the groove. So it rides along the top of the cask and cuts this groove. It's, for want of a better word, an early type of router. Whereas in carpentry you would hold a timber and run a plane over it. In coopering it's the exact opposite. We hold the plane and we run the timber over the plane. And the block I'm using here to hold the jointer is the one that's in this photograph right here. And this photograph is Jameson in 1905. So we're still using the same equipment that our ancestors would have used. So just to show you how the jointer works, this particular one is a heading jointer for making the heads of casks. It's a little bit shorter. So the best thing is to do is just show you how it works. So you can see how quick you remove timber and how brilliant an edge you get on the timber, as your joints have to be perfect. If they're not perfect, they'll leak and you'll lose your product.
Ger will be passing his skills on to another generation. Midleton plans to hire an apprentice cooper soon to carry on the tradition. For more stories about whiskey and the people who make it, visit WhiskyCast.com. I'm Mark Gillespie.